Mark and Julie Appleyard.
That was a great interview.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it.
It was fun to introduce you to them.
We talked about the traditional church model and what they're kind of doing to think about church in different ways.
Yeah. In fact, halfway through this, which I don't know why it took me that long to figure it out, I realized the title, Rethinking Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was...
Let me say that again. Halfway through this, I realized that this is a podcast called Rethinking Church. Not only rethinking God, Thomas, but rethinking church.
But they also talk about the things that we're really passionate in talking about, which is what does intimacy and a life of intimacy look like?
Yeah.
And how does that actually overlay with what church life should actually look like? So, and they're Aussies.
They're
right?
Aussies and very good friends of mine. So it was a lot of fun to have them on. They don't really get into their story until about halfway through. So I'll just give you a heads up. They're pastors. They've pastored for many years and have a ministry now, an international ministry where they pastor globally. So a lot of wisdom, a lot of grace.
Yeah. He does a lot of consulting though outside of the church as well.
Yeah,
so with business leaders and CEOs, and so there's a lot that he does and that they do, and I loved getting to meet them. That was great.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, he's awesome. Pioneers, probably some of the craziest leaders I know. Fearless in jumping out of an airplane. They're the first out.
Yep.
They're always the first out.
Yep.
So high level leadership stuff from these guys, and I think you're really going to enjoy this.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
All right. I'm excited to have you guys with us. I've been telling Thomas about my good friends, the Appleyards, and how I've been running with you guys for years. I don't know anybody who is less scared of the goodness of God than you guys. And I say that as the greatest compliment. I remember the first time when I was trepidatiously investigating the idea that maybe control was a flawed way by which to define the nature of God. You and I were on staff together. That's how we met at a church, and you were the guy that I could throw the craziest thoughts at. And I remember I was at your house and I threw this thought at you, and I said it with a little conviction. I said, "Hey, Mark, what if the sovereignty of God has nothing to do with God being in control?" And I remember you made a face, and it was that face that I was afraid of, but it was only there for just a half second. And then you were like, tell me more. You've always been one to encourage radical thoughts about the goodness of God, which is what we're doing with this podcast, which is the passion behind what we're doing, is the idea that he's really, really good, and that he's so good that any spot on our lens, any flaw on our lens regarding his perfect love for us is worthy of looking at again and reassessing. And that's the heart behind it. And I don't know anybody who as radically willing to be the first, if you will, into the water than you guys.
I know someone else who did that one day in Norway.
I got teased the other day because I posted about how cold it was here by somebody who'd been to Norway and was like, "Didn't you go in the Northern Sea in March?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right."
I heard about this story.
Oh yeah. We have photographic evidence.
We do.
But I'm in my underwear, so let's not post that anywhere.
That's right.
You guys are leaders. You're pioneers. Sometimes it's almost scary how quick you are to jump.
There's no almost about it.
Tell us about that, Julie.
It's really scary. Faith is about risk and doing it scared.
You could speak to that.
Maybe we could start there. On that point, faith is about risk. That the Lord taught me that powerfully. I was speaking in Amsterdam years ago with Andy Mason and my beautiful bride here, and they both, Andy and Julie, had already had a run at the mountain, and it was my turn the following morning. It's 10 o'clock at night. I've done some preparation, man. I'm getting ready to knock it out of the park. There's going to be a whole building full of people that have paid good money to come hear us talk about ministry in the marketplace. And I lay my head on my pillow at 10 o'clock at night, and the Lord said, "So Mark, you know that message you've been working hard preparing?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I want you to ditch it." Straight away, cold sweat What? He goes, yeah. He said, I want you to ditch it. I got something else. So I said, well, what is it? He goes, I'm not going to tell you yet. And that's I had to question. There was a spot on my lens at that moment about the goodness of God. But I said, all right, so that's what we're going to do. It's about him. It's not about me anyway. And I remember I went to bed. I struggled to sleep at about 3:00 in the morning. I woke up, and it was a in-depth teaching around the nature of the faith of God that is spelled R-I-S-K.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, it ended up being a message that blew the conference apart. Typically, we look at growth in kingdom as a bell curve. It's like, okay, it goes up, it ebbs, it flows, it goes up. But in actual fact, it's meant to be an S curve because we're meant to go from glory to glory to glory.
Yeah.
So it was challenging that supposition straight away of, okay, wow, this is new thinking. And so as the Lord downloaded this, I remember I just scribbled it down. The R was, first of all, we got to recognize change is coming. It's the first thing we have to do. Our eyes are cast on the horizon while they're here in the present. The I is then identify the scope of that change. So now get busy and do your research, understand what is the change that is coming, and get really detailed, get into the weeds on that thing, understand it as good as any person on the planet. So first of all, recognize, I identify. S is then you've got to step in and activate that. And if you don't feel like puking in that moment, then it's not big enough. There's got to be something about that says we've literally thrown ourselves into the middle of miracle territory in this moment. And so that's step in and activate the change. And the K is the kingdom favor that's there to steward now, this new kingdom favor. The problem is a lot of believers stay in the K, and we call that la land. It's a false positive because very early on you forget that it took R, I, and S to get you the K. So just when you're in the K and you're starting to steward the favor, you've got to remember the next R is on the horizon. And it's time to recognize again that change is coming, because we're not to tip over and fall into the crash zone. I won't worry about going there, but there's a crash zone that we fall into when we come on the other side, because in the top of that bell curve, as the R comes, we now move up to another S and head up again and get ready, because faith is always RISK.
I love that. We've, of course, had this conversation on many occasions. What I love about this, too, is that RISK, faith, is risk. But what the fruit of that is, or maybe where you would land, is that it could also be spelled TRUST. That the fruit is trust. And I've said it this way: when you jump out of an airplane, everybody would call that a leap of faith. But the actual reason that it isn't insanity is because you put your trust on the parachute that's on your back. Right. And so the beautiful thing that happens, especially when you're talking to pioneers, is that sometimes you'll jump out of an airplane and you really didn't even know that you had trust yet. So it gets developed in the middle of it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's so good.
But it's why it keeps coming back to his goodness, his goodness, his goodness, his goodness, because it's all in now. You're all in on that thing. So.
Yeah, no, that's true enough. It's, and we can only trust that which we believe. We've been doing a lot of talking around and trying to unpack what is it about that causes us to again and again and again step into the midst of miracle territory. And be on the pointy end of the spear of what God is just going after in the world. And why do we feel so uncomfortably comfortable there? And when we've finished one thrust, it's like, okay, we can't do anything else but jump on and go for another. And what we've sort of brought some language around is that, first of all, encounter with his perfect love is the basic operating premise of anything kingdom. That's the starting point. What encounter does is it produces belief in who he is and belief in who he's created us to be as his sons and daughters. But when I come into that encounter with his love, and my belief about who he is and who I am adjusts, now my value system falls into alignment. So the resultant behavior is trust. And as I step into trust and activate my faith, I then have another encounter with him, which increases my belief and understanding, and so on and so forth. And what we've discovered is that belief is the container for faith. So the greater my belief in who he is and who he's created me to be, then the greater my faith capacity is for being able to carry faith. So if I want to have great faith, I don't have great faith without great belief. The two are in an inseparable relationship. And I don't get great belief without deeper encounter. And that's very much where Julie really just leads us into is, I'll take us further, but she'll take us deeper into encounters with his perfect love for greater impact, because he wants to love the world through people.
Yeah.
I was just thinking podcast listeners aren't going to see what he did with his hands there, so you probably need to explain that a little bit more detail so that people actually understand what you were talking about.
That is true.
you.
Yeah, I can see you. One hand is above and one hand below, but they weren't in alignment. So you moved them into alignment.
Phil Johnson always says if there's a problem, it's never on God's end.
Right.
He's not going to move, so we have to do some moving to make sure we line up with it.
And on that very point, one of the things that gets us thrown out of many places is this whole concept of I'm very suspicious of values-driven organisations, i.e. churches, the starting point. Because values is just a spiritual word for performance. And because values is not a list of behaviours I force myself to follow. Values are something that comes out of what I truly believe. So when I join an organisation and I've got to follow their list of values and I get measured against those values without dealing with the belief issue, I can only hold those values in tension until the next trial, tragedy, trauma or tribulation comes my way. And in that moment, my heart will default back to its true belief system. And so we are in these places of tension. So when we've got values-driven cultures, we've actually got performance-driven cultures, not encounter-driven cultures.
We could talk a whole hour on that. Do you mind unpacking that a little more about a performance-driven, maybe value system or culture versus an encounter-driven culture?
Yeah, it's a good question that we need to unpack and explore, and that is performance is a list of behaviours. Values is a resultant behaviours is how we measure our values, typically speaking. So when I step into a culture that says, well, here's our values, and we want you to subscribe to those values, then if I don't have a belief that produces those values, the only thing I can do is perform the function that those values demand, which I'll be assessed and measured. So now what we end up with is in churches and the body of Christ, largely we have KPIs, key performance indicators, that are measured through the lens of values. But there's a real issue with that, is the kingdom's not about performance.
And KPIs have been borrowed from the business world, which is about performance.
Yeah.
And then you talk to Christian business owners who want to be kingdom business owners and really want to run their business for kingdom, but they're still following the world's way of doing things. They're still following the KPIs, the key performance indicators, in order to make sure, and they'll spiritualize what those performances are, but at the end of the day, they're still performances. They're still, are you behaving correctly? Are you adhering to the rules? Are you doing all the right things, jumping through all the right hoops in order to get the right result, which is not kingdom.
Yeah, so we work around developing KRIs, or key relationship indicators, because the kingdom's about relationship. Because Jesus says this really annoying thing when he's asked, what's the greatest commandment? It's got nothing to do with performance at all. It's got everything to do with relationship predicated on encounters with his perfect love. And so we looked at key relationship indicators, which we looked at as honor, respect, dignity, and creativity. Honor is recognizing who I am. Respect is me then recognizing who you are. Dignity is protecting who you are, and creativity is releasing who you are.
That's so good. This is so near and dear to my heart. You guys are pastors, because whoever's listening right now would be like, okay, like what do they do? First, they understood risk, because when I met them, you can tell they have an accent. They're from somewhere else. They're from Australia. And they literally packed their 3 kids and enough stuff in their suitcases and whatever they could get in a container and moved to the U.S. To pastor an expression or an extension of the church I was involved with. And that's how we got to know each other. So 2 things are happening in your lives. One, you are called to pastor people, called to lead people, called into ministry, and I'm doing air quotes because ministry is way bigger than maybe how we would define it. So you're doing that. You're operating within the context of the traditional model before, when you were in Australia, and then when you got here as well. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, in light of what we've just talked about, a little bit about that story, and then the biggest, greatest jump that you guys took about 3 years ago when you moved away from some of the traditional ways in which we've done church, but you didn't leave the heartbeat of God or the body of Christ or the calling of pastoring or the church itself. Can you tell us your story a little bit?
God gave Mark a vision for church when we were in Australia, and the first couple of lines of that vision kept us awake for years. and would have us waking up in a cold sweat and looking at each other and going, oh no, please let this not be right. The opening lines of this, there's a whole thing, and you can get to it on our website, which I'm sure we'll end up with links to later on. But the first few lines of this were, I see a church so influential that a city cannot ignore it and buildings cannot contain her growth. It went on. It was really inspirational. It was the thing that got us out of bed in the morning. It was the, everybody that we read it to was like, yes, we want this church. This is awesome. But we didn't know what that would look like, because the only lens we knew to look through was the traditional church model. And if you're looking at that through a traditional church model, then in order for a church to be influential in a city, it has to be large. And that was proven by the very next line, which said buildings will not contain her growth, or buildings cannot contain her growth.
Right.
Like, we're going to be on a perpetual building program because we're going to build a huge building, and we're going to fill it with people, and we're going to outgrow the building, and we're going to have to get a bigger facility, and then we're going to outgrow the building. And just that whole thing in itself was enough to... that was just enough to give us cold chills. So this is the vision.
That had freaked us out, because back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, we'd helped to plant a church on the Gold Coast in Australia, and we built a building that contained 600 people in 3 days. We got 450 people in from around the world. People came to Jesus on the building site and all that kind of stuff, and national media coverage and all that kind of thing. Wow. And we're sitting there going, well, we can build buildings quick, but I think I shaved 10 years off my life. I don't want to go near that again.
It was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did it once, but once is enough. So we've got this vision, and we know what we're called to build. So when we came over to the States, and we had the opportunity to plant a campus of Crossroads United Methodist Church, we were not Methodist.
Neither was I. But it was a lot of fun.
We actually did a whole lot of research into Wesley and what he stood for and what his history was and everything.
Me too.
We had to learn that history almost better than the Methodists themselves, because we had no idea. But we're building this church, and Mark, I remember Mark was very adamant that he needed to join the business association in Waxhaw, in the area that we are. He'd always been in business. He'd always run his own business. He's always, been in the working world as well as in the ministry world. He was always bivocational. Over here, our visa didn't allow him to do that. So he joined the business association so that he could still have a foot in each camp. It became one of those things where we started to learn that a church with a big influence didn't have to be a very big church. We were a very small church, but we were starting to have a lot of influence. There were a lot of people starting to call him, business leaders and town commissioners and government level leaders in our area would call him. Having marriage issues, I've got a problem with my son, I'm really struggling with whether I should run for office again, all
looking for a pastor.
Things, they were looking for a pastor. So he became the pastor to the local area. Praying with people. My mother's died and we don't go to church anywhere. Can you do the funeral? He was really becoming the pastor and having a really big influence in this little town. But we never asked people to come to our church. It was always a no strings attached type thing. We got to a point where the church itself...
Sorry, I've got to butt in here.
Go on.
A friend of mine puts it this way. He said, when you try and solicit when you're doing ministry, he said, it's like someone steps into the elevator and farts and the door closes. Everybody can smell it. They're not going to say anything about it, but they can't wait for the doors to open and get out of there as quick as they can.
That's hilarious.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it smells. It smells. Yeah,
it does. It smells really bad, and we don't want it. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to say, well, we're going to give you help with this hand, but we're going to try and drag you into church in the other. So around about that time, we're starting to look at the other thing that the Lord really spoke to us about was our metrics of success. How do you measure success? As a pastor, and for the last 15, 20 years, we had been measuring success by the amount of people that came through the doors and the amount that they were giving and whether we were meeting budget or not. So, affectionately, butts and budgets. That was what we were measuring success by. And when the Lord challenged us and said, he gave Mark a couple of different scenarios and we talked about these. And he said, when do you feel better? When the church is full and giving is way up, but nobody got healed. Nobody really was transformed. Or the church was half empty, could shoot a cannon and not hit anybody. Giving was way down and you're worried about meeting budget, but people encountered Jesus in a really, really transformative way. When do you feel best? And we had to hold the mirror up and honestly say, oh gosh, in our head we're saying we want the encounter, but your heart and your spirit leaps when the church building's full and the budget's being met, and we really had to look hard at that. So we made a decision. We decided that our metric of success was going to change, and the Lord warned us that we'd lose some people along the way and that it wouldn't be the most comfortable ride ever, and he was right.
And I might pick it up from this point.
You can, go for it.
So in effect, what happened in this time was a season of a couple of years, and in the midst of that, I got connected up with the guys out at Bethel, Heaven in Business, and ended up through them connected up with a business guy who had asked, would I become his pastor? And I'm thinking, well, this is odd. I said, I want to dispel a myth straight away. I'm no longer, serving on the executive team of a mega church. I pastor this tiny little community. It's like about this big, really,
on the radar.
In a tiny little country suburb of Charlotte, which isn't even the capital of the state. I want to make sure you got no delusions of grandeur here. He said, no. He said there was a prophetic release and it was very, powerful. And he said, no, I'd like you to come alongside and coach and pastor me for a season. And I said, I really think I could do that. And so we developed a system that worked. And in this process of encounter, we'd gone through a series of teaching. And like you, I've heard a lot of Christian phrases and things come and go. They're the latest pop culture of Christianity, and one of them that had come, but had really stuck in my spirit that I really felt was capturing and arresting my attention was the on earth as it is in heaven, because it wasn't just fine sounding words. It was in the heart of the disciples' prayer. And I just sat there and thought, but the thing that frustrated me, really frustrated me, is lots of people talking about it, but the actual pragmatics of how do I do it, no matter what I read, it was all the fluff and bubble of, the charismatic world here or a little bit there or whatever. And I'm going, I can't see anybody. So you know me now, I get frustrated. And I said, you know what? I've had a gutful of this. I'm doing something about it because there's something on this. I love the way you say it. There's juice on it. I know that this one's going to stick around because it's stuck around 2,000 years to this point. It's going to stick around up some more. So I shut our whole church systems programs down and I said, this is what we're doing for the next 3 months. Everybody in the house, we're going to spend a month learning to think how heaven thinks, a month learning to speak how heaven speaks, a month learning to live how heaven lives on earth as it is in heaven. End of story.
So we shut down kids' church.
Yep.
We shut down youth.
Yeah.
We kept the nursery open because the littles were,
but
they're
that
not
was
even following conversation at the moment. But we had all the kids in, which meant that any teaching that we did had to be taught at a level that would arrest their attention,
right.
Which meant that everybody got it.
Yeah, so we started seeing people.
Everybody had to get it.
Walk on out to their parking lot to the car, and all of a sudden they'd break out in tongues for the first time as they're about to open the door handles of their cars, and people getting healed in the. And you would think, man,
learning how to prophesy over each other and healing.
Exactly. And you would think, man, how cool, the kingdom has come, and they scattered like ants.
Yeah,
isn't that crazy? Here we have an encounter with Jesus and the people of God. Lots of them are just going, I don't know that I'm into that. It went a little bit too long today. I'm not sure that this bit about the kids. No, I'm an adult. I don't need. And it's just like, are you kidding me? This really blew us away. So all that was happening at the same time. So I started coaching my friend on Think, Speak, and Live, and we got into it for a few sessions. And he stopped me and he said two things. He said, first of all, he said, I've read everything there is to read on business and ministry. I'm well read. He said, I'm going to say right off the bat, he said, I don't care who I talk to. Nobody has this language that you have for business and ministry, and we have to get it written down. And if you write it down, he said, he would write the foreword. And he said, secondly, will we travel out to spend time with him out where he lived and out in Dubai? So we said, okay, well, let's do that. Well, we shot out and then, connected us with other executives in the region. That's, I think, going on 5 years ago now.
2016.
2016, there you go, February 2016. We've now been active, I think, in 20 nations, working with business leaders all over the world, from the highest level down to startups and everything in between. And the Lord was starting to really shift this expression of what on earth as it is look like.
Right. We got to the point where it was, as you said earlier, Jason, we knew we were called to pastoral ministry, air quotes.
Sure.
We knew we were called to the local church and to pastor a church, but we also knew that there was definitely something on the international stuff that was starting to pop up, and the global look of all of this. We felt a little bit like we had one foot on a train that was pulling away from a platform, and one foot on the platform, and something was going to give if we didn't figure out which side we wanted to be on.
Right.
And we wrestled with it, and the church is shrinking. We were Gideon's army. We used to be, really big. We were at least 120 people, and now we're sort of back looking at maybe 40, maybe 45.
And that was the conundrum, because, I've got business leaders paying me very good money to tell them stuff that they're going, this is blowing my world apart here. My business is changing. My business is shifting.
My family is shifting. My personal life is shifting. My relationship with God is shifting.
Right. And some of these are business leaders that are arguably in the top 5 or 10 most influential in the world, even right now, coming back and saying, this is what the needle is shifting. And then we'll teach the same stuff on a Sunday and people go, yeah, I'm not so sure about it.
And then they'd say, what are you teaching them? Why can't you give us the same thing that we're teaching them? We're saying, you're getting it first.
It's like,
you're getting it. Here's the smorgasbord. You get first pick, and they're going,
Yeah.
It's where is the anointing for the people that God is calling you to? So we had to wrestle with this whole, well, what does traditional church look like? Yeah. We're hearing people being more and more disillusioned with traditional church for various reasons, feeling like, particularly in the business world, that businessmen were valued for their wallets, not for their creativity. They felt like they were really only welcome on the finance team. And only welcome if they were putting money towards or blessing whatever the vision of the church was. If they came with their own ideas, they were very quickly sort of, brushed aside and ushered into the financial committee and this is where we can control you. And they were feeling frustrated because they were having all these amazing creative that would reach the world for the kingdom and not being able to find an expression for that in church. So we're talking about all of this, and we're getting to the point of going, okay, well, then there was the scalability thing.
Yeah, that's right. I was sitting down here, not here at our last house, I was sitting down one day and I caught up one of those worldometers. And just looking at, those who are checking in through births and those that are checking out through deaths in real time rate as it's ticking over, and looking at the world population growth. And I sat there and I thought about it. We've tried and attempted models of church without going into the details of it, but you name the model, we've pretty much done it at some point in terms of the West. And I looked at that and I thought, even our very best efforts, no matter what we do, it is a cost prohibitive proposition to develop the church in any one of those models that could even come close to keeping up with that population growth. We spend so much time focusing on, the forms and types of our worship and programs and whatever else that we're doing. But that doesn't really sit on the highest point of the agenda of the kingdom of God, when the scalability issue is the main elephant in the room. Because no matter what we do, we're falling hopelessly short of even coming close to keeping up to date on that. All we do is we try and find more ways of redressing up the old thing, and it's just not working. And I think there's a generation coming that's realizing that in part the emperor has no clothes. And that's a harsh thing to say, but when I look at the heartbeat of it, there's just some major questions that have got to be asked. For us, it was a question of, what if we stripped everything back? What if we sold the building? What if we literally got back to the drawing board and said, okay, what are the key principles that we've learnt out of our journey? Let's stop and be thankful for the journey. But let's pull the principles out of the journey that we learnt. What if we truly put love at the center? What if love was absolutely the highest goal, that it was the centerpiece, the nucleus around which everything else orbited? And I mean, truly, that was it. Not just
a sermon topic.
Or a value on our values list, but actually was the centerpiece. And we built from that with a view to try and solve the scalability problem. What would that look like? First of all, it would look like something where really input from other pastors really would not be helpful. At that point, but talking to other people who had solved scalability issues, they're the people I need to sit and talk to. So I did.
Right.
We started to adapt, a model and a structure and a system to do that, to scale encounters with His perfect love, and for love to be agile, the church has to be mobile.
What did that end up looking like for you guys as you engaged in that process and did research and I guess just engaged in prayer and all the things you guys did? What did it look like?
It looked like totally flipping everything on its head. As Mark said, we sold our church building. We'd only bought it 3 or 4 years earlier, and we were celebrating when we bought it because we've finally gotten to that point of maturity as a church where you can buy
the building.
It was like, oh man, this thing is so cumbersome. And we shut down Sunday services. We multiplied ourselves out. We're very careful about the language that we use. We don't divide and we don't split into groups. We multiply out into groups, and we birth new groups. Everybody looks forward to a birth. Everybody anticipates a birth. It's exciting. It's new life. It's like, this new thing that's coming. But nobody gets excited about a split or a divide. It's painful.
Right.
It's negative. So we're really careful about the language that we used. We had everybody in smaller groups, meeting in homes, and we developed a system and a structure, I suppose, that can actually work to grow. And it can grow exponentially. We're still ironing out some wrinkles at the moment, and what we find is, particularly in the Western church setting, growth is harder because the traditional model of church is so ingrained that we are still reliant on somebody else to do the work of evangelism, to do the work of teaching and discipleship. So at the moment, what we're really trying to go to school on is it's every believer's right and privilege and mandate to disciple people, build relationships, disciple them, and and do the work of evangelism. Not everybody is gifted as an evangelist. I get that, but everybody is able to build a relationship.
So what we did is we developed a very basic structure. That one of the principles we learned with the coaching model is it's, unless you're a Coca-Cola or an Amazon and the like, you can't scale the complex. You can only scale the simple. So again, we stripped it right back. Love in its purest form is very, very simple. And so we said, okay, what did it look like if the Bible clearly says, is it 1 John 4, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. So whether a person knows it or not, they are the pervading spiritual. They have access
That's
to
good.
becoming the pervading spiritual influence when they walk in the room.
Yeah.
And so we looked at it and said, well, by nature of that fact, every believer is a leader simply by he who is in them.
There you go.
So what would it mean to lead in love? What if they were leadership incubators to learn how to access, the all authority that Jesus puts us under? And so we went LEAD. What did it mean to lead in love? First of all, when people would come together, they would link the love of God one to another. And we used the little phrase through meeting, greeting, and eating, intentional relationship building. The E is they would then encounter his love together through worship and the sacraments. So now you actually have a church because you have the sacraments taking place.
Yeah.
The A is then they would activate the love of God within through teaching and through prayer and the gifts of the Spirit. And then the D is your deliverable, that they would deliver the love of God to others so they in turn can link, encounter, activate, deliver.
Yeah.
So in its simplest form, that was the basic element that we put together.
Found is that after the first 2 weeks, we had doubled in size. And we weren't in a building. And at that moment, we looked at that vision statement and that little line that said, buildings cannot contain her growth.
There it is.
And we got it. It only took us 15 years, but we got it.
Hey guys, just a quick break to let you know that you can find Thomas and I on familystory.org. You can also sign up for the mailing list where we release weekly articles, monthly message podcast, and then we keep you up to speed on any opportunities, teachings, travels that we're doing.
You guys can check out my Instagram page. I'm posting stuff on mental health, wholeness, inner healing. I also do a good amount of work with the Enneagram, and I'm going to be doing a couple of Facebook Lives here coming up. My Instagram handle is my first name, my middle initial, and my last name. So that's Thomas F. Floyd.
And mine is Jason Clark is.
Jason Clark is.
Yes.
Is what? Is there?
Is whatever you need him to be.
Jason.
Whatever you want him to be. Yeah, so go to familystory.org or check out our Instagram handles for more content and information. Bless you guys. We'll get back to this podcast. One of the things I know about you guys, and one of the things that we love to talk about, is that the more convinced we are in the perfection of his love, the more we can risk, right? And that's where we started. And the more we're invited into the scary stuff. I already, as you guys were talking, I realized that this episode is going to be called Rethinking Church. because that's kind of what's happening. Even while you're talking, you're defining, you're actually pushing against certain understandings that we've had for so long. And the only way you can do that, and the only ones I would trust willing to do that, are those that are convinced that he's good, that his love is perfect. And this is the statement. I want you to expound on this a little bit: the uncontrolling love of God. Because what you've said is, to me, the crux of probably the greatest pushback that you would get is the statement you said that everyone is a leader. What you're speaking to is really a profound thought about how Jesus actually moves and has his being, and how love is actually going to answer the questions that ache in the heart of humanity. There's a phrase in this article that you guys got coming out. I want to read it, and I want you to speak to it because it's just a profound thought. People still are not perfect, but Jesus isn't afraid of people's sin. Once we understood that, a genuine culture of freedom emerged. And I would love you to speak to that truth right there, because that is huge. And that is a big, big deal in leadership in the church today, because we're so focused on what they might do, or how they might fail. Or, I would love you to expand on that.
Yeah, for me, I think, and I can only speak it from my own perspective because I can't presume what goes through other pastors' minds. So, the safe ground is just to go, here's what it meant for Mark. And what it meant for Mark was that when I was, again, if I was brutally honest and I dared to take hold of the mirror that Holy Spirit wanted to hold up to my heart, I found that in many of my activities and behaviors were creating systems and processes that I would call, spiritual growth, discipleship, but really what I was doing was creating systems to control the sin issue. Therefore, most of my time was a spiritual policer, and I was policing the rules rather than actually and putting people more in relationship with those rules than I was in relationship with the Redeemer. And that was and the more they adhered to the rules, they lived out the values. I was blinded to the fact because I believed that that means they're growing more in their faith. No, they're not. They're following the behavior. And you go to a church and you look at the pastor, and then you see everybody who dresses like the pastor, sounds like the pastor, whatever else. That's not freedom. It tells me here's a person who's professional at being able to police the rules around here. And so much so that people fall into a line because now they feel safe. It's a false positive, but they feel safe and secure because the rules are in place. But what if we dared to challenge that and break it apart? What if we didn't become policers of rules but releasers of people? That was a very different set of propositions and a very different series of activities that Mark would have to perform in order to create something like that. And I remember I sat down with the Lord one day, and Jason knows our model. It's a fractal model for growth and development. And I looked at that model, and this real deep, I'm gonna puke feeling just washed over my soul, thinking, oh dear. I've got it really wrong here. And I remember taking it to the Lord and said, Lord, what I've got here in this fractal model can't be from you. And he goes, why not? And I said, because it just puts so much responsibility and control back into the hands of people, and surely that cannot be from you. I mean, this is a frank and honest conversation.
Wow.
And I said, is this from you? I had to ask the question because I learned a long time ago, I want to ask questions that reach a king's ears. And this is a question that reached the king's ears. I said, is this really from you? And this is the only response I got. He said, Mark, when I gave the Great Commission, I gave it full well knowing there'd be Corinthian-style churches, but I gave it anyway. In other words, he was saying, I'm not afraid of the sin issue anymore. I've dealt with that.
Wow.
They're creating cultures for their freedom. He's much more passionate about that than the sin issue that he's already dealt with.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so for us, that was like that shifted everything for us when we arrived in that place.
With, the Corinthian style churches, read through 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Paul is addressing all manner of sin in the church. The guy who's sleeping with people he shouldn't be sleeping with, and people who are doing, he addresses
it's messy.
a bunch of stuff that's really messy.
It's abhorrent.
I think, with the whole COVID-19 thing as well, we made this shift, 3 years ago, 3, 4, however many years ago. We've been doing it for a little while now. And then COVID-19 hit. Before COVID-19, we were crazy. Why would you want to put it online? It's so impersonal. It's so, it's too distant. There's no accountability. There's no, all of that kind of stuff. COVID-19 hit, and within the week,
You guys were like trending.
every church
was calling you, hey, how do you do this?
was scrambling to try and get their church services online. And we just kept rolling. We just kept doing what we were doing.
The things that just force us to stay on the anvil. I'd say that's probably where we live. A lot of our time is on the anvil, constantly hammering, constantly letting go, constantly picking up. I got a picture one day, and we were walking this whole thing out. And it was a picture of climbing a rope. And when you climb it, you're climbing up a rope like in a gymnasium. There's one thing that is very true of climbing a rope is you can only climb as high as your bottom hand will let you go. There comes a point where if you don't matter how much you're going to reach, you can't reach any further because your bottom hand will keep you stuck. So you've got to let go of one hand in order to take up. But guess what? Yesterday's top hand is now today's bottom hand, and so on and so forth. So the thing is that the whole trust process and rhythm of walking this stuff through is that you spend most of the time with only one hand on the rope. There's only a very short amount of time both hands are on the rope, and you feel sure what's going on around you. Just for a second, and then you hit RISK all over again.
Yeah. You just defined Mark Appleyard. That phrase right there. There's only a short amount of time where both hands are on the rope. Mark Appleyard. And Julie Appleyard too.
Me by default, I think. I've always said I feel like I'm just riding his coattails, and everybody says, "Oh no, you in your own right," all that blah blah blah. But no, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for him.
Let me ask you, Julie. I was reading this article that's coming out, and I knew some of this conversation. We could have gone anywhere, but you guys are forerunners right now. And you're pioneering a new model, a fresh model from the foundational approach of an encounter with his love. And so I'd love you to speak to this while we're talking about church. The church, as ecclesia, infers a responsibility to be a witness to the world, to bring heaven to earth as Christ's ambassadors. Yet if this is our sole definition of what it means to be the church, we are missing what Jesus called the good part. I can keep reading. It's a really good article. But what's the good part?
So when we're talking about, depending on where you grew up as to how you pronounce ecclesia or ecclesia, I say ecclesia, you say ecclesia, whatever, potato. But when we're talking about the ecclesia, the church, the legislative assembly, when Jesus was talking to Peter at Caesarea Philippi, where he says to him, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, they all say you're a prophet. He says, "But who do you say that I am?"
Yeah.
And Peter says, you are the Son of God. And Jesus says, "Blessed are you, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. It's not been told to you by man. You've had this revelation from heaven. And on this foundation of truth, on this bedrock, I will build my church." So he's talking about, you will be my ecclesia. You will be my legislative community. My legislative community. You will go out. This was a Greek term that was familiar to the disciples, because the Roman Empire, they lived under it. So they knew what the Roman ecclesia was. And now Jesus is saying, you'll be my ecclesia, which means you will be my representatives that go into the world to carry the kingdom and bring the kingdom culture wherever you go. Because that's what the Roman ecclesia did. They brought the Roman culture wherever they went, and they Romanized the world. Yeah. So Jesus is saying, take my kingdom culture, right? And then in the Great Commission, he says, go into all the world. Yeah. As my ecclesia, bring my kingdom culture and teach them to do everything that I've commanded you to do. What were the two greatest commandments that he gave? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So he's saying, take my kingdom culture of love everywhere you go, and kingdomize the world, I suppose. I don't know if you're wanting to Romanize the world. But so we're looking at this. That takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. You can't just go out and bring kingdom culture if you haven't got a relationship with God this way. Yeah. Right. So those two commandments were love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Make sure your relationship vertically between yourself and God is as intimate and as strong as it can possibly be. That's the definition of the bride. Is our relationship with God, our intimacy, the deeper in intimacy that we get with God. That's the bride. Yeah. And you need that part before you can do the second part, which is love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. That's the ecclesia. That's the Great Commission. That's go into all the world. But you can't go into all the world and courageously love other people unless you have your own intimate relationship with God happening. Yeah.
That'll preach.
So the good part is the intimacy part. And so many of us are afraid of intimacy on some level, that we kind of try and sidestep it or brush it aside or minimize it to some degree in order to get out there and do the business it's another rule to follow. It's legalism. And we've got to get about the business of fulfilling the Great Commission. Well, the whole business of the Great Commission being fulfilled is the bride, the intimacy, and then the ecclesia. And it's two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other.
In my work, I do a lot of emotional wholeness and just wholeness in general in my work as just a therapist. And one of the things I have to continually encourage my people, especially believers, is that our doing has to come from our being. Yeah. We can't just be doing machines without knowing who we are and knowing our place in the relationship with the Father. And so what I hear you say there is that it's important to do, but it's also important to know where that doing is coming from. Right. It has a source. Yeah. It's got an anchor. So Well, and you phrased it really well. I'm going to read back to you what you wrote. But without the intimacy we cultivate as the bride, and in this case individually, we have nothing to give to the world as his church. Or as his ecclesia or ecclesia.
Either way.
Either. It's good. But that's the foundation. I mean, that's you wouldn't think that's Rethinking Church, but a lot of it is, isn't it?
Sadly so.
It is, yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of churches doing a lot of good things.
Yeah.
And we're not saying that traditional church should close its doors and pack up shop and cease to exist. But now it's time to step into that miracle territory, to that trusting the Holy Spirit, taking a risk, looking for the change on the horizon. There is a generation who's not satisfied with what traditional church offers anymore, and it needs to be that plus something else. It's not salvation plus something. Hear me on that. It's traditional church needs a helping hand just to keep up with the population growth. Forget about anything else. We're not keeping up with the population growth. We need to do something differently. The way that Jesus set it up, the way that he told his disciples to go into all the world as the ecclesia, that can go viral. That can keep up with the population growth. That it can. And you read about it in Acts, and you read in chapter 2, verses 42 to 47, the Lord added to their number daily. Those who were being saved. That's even if it was just that church in Jerusalem, that's doing much better than most of our churches are doing. You know, I mean, we've run a church for how many years have we run a church, and we cannot say that the Lord added to our number daily in that traditional model. Something had to change. So you had to think differently. I've been journaling recently on Jesus's conversations with his disciples through Matthew, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to him and said, "Show us a miraculous sign, prove to us that you're the Messiah." And Jesus said, "Only a wicked generation asks for a miraculous sign. The only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah." And then he goes across the lake with his disciples, and the disciples forgot to bring bread, and Jesus says to them, and I don't you marvel at how Jesus kind of just weaves stuff in? And I think, how on earth do you make that connection between those things? So I've spent a lot of time in this, and there is a connection. I challenge you to go looking for it. He says, "Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." And the disciples jump to the conclusion that he's scolding them. And he says, "You have no faith. Don't you see all the things that we've done? The Pharisees have so much, and they'll distribute it among the few of them, right? They get so much." He said, "But weren't you there when I fed 5,000 people and when I fed 4,000 people with just a few loaves and fishes?" He's talking about the metrics of heaven are so different. With a little bit, we can distribute it to many and make an impact for the kingdom, because the kingdom is about abundance. It's not about keeping, and it's not about protecting. It's about releasing. So he's talking about all of this. He's basically saying to them, think differently. You can't think like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. We've got to think differently. And Pharisaical thinking has worked its way down through every generation, and it still bothers us today. We just don't recognize it. And I feel like the Lord's saying, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You've got to think differently than they do. You can't think the same way, because it won't work that way. The kingdom is not your way. It's my way, and you've got to do it my way. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. So anyway,
I like it.
A little rabbit trail for you.
You know, it can sound like sometimes you're having a conversation about everything that the church has done wrong or doing wrong. And I remember a trip I took to China, probably, and I've shared this with you. I was in China. I was meeting with a fellow there who was a businessman. I'd just seen his success. I'd just seen he has several factories, nearly 1,000 people in each factory. and they were well paid. They had childcare, they had health care, things that don't exist in China. And 80% of his staff were saved. Just it had happened. They were Christians. They'd had relationships, and they were greatly impacting the underground church. So I'd just seen all this. I'm sitting across the table with him over chicken heads and something else, and he looks at me, and out of the blue, he says something that was like lightning from God in the way that I thought. He said the kingdom and the church are two separate things. He said, we're here to advance the kingdom, but we are the church. Mm-hmm. And then he said, I moved to China to be a missionary, but you can't be a missionary in China, so I started a business. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm advancing the kingdom through the church, known as business. Mm-hmm. That was how he was saying it. I'm advancing the kingdom through this structure right here, right now. He was explaining to me, he was flexible in his cultural context. He was advancing the kingdom as the church, and it looked like, and I'd just seen it, the evidence of it. I'd just seen it. It was business. I'd also been to the orphanage that had been funded by these businesses for special needs children in China, which is another level of miraculous. So I've seen right now the kingdom advanced through what he's saying. So he says, the next thing he says to me is really profound. He says, Jason, there will always be a Sunday morning in the Western culture. Mm-hmm. Now, what he was addressing in me was he was saying, we have a certain thought process around what church looks like in the Western culture, and it includes meeting. He said, this is what he said, actually. He said, even unsaved people go to church. No, you go to church on Sunday morning in the Western culture. What I love about what you guys are running at, and maybe we can kind of work our way through to a conclusion here. What I love about you guys and how you live and move and have your being is it's the goodness of God, and it's love, foundationally love, that we're having an encounter with his love. And then you're not afraid to be the first to run at the structures and the systems and call into question the hypocrisies and the controlling aspects of the Pharisaical stuff that goes on that you just mentioned, Julie, that is very alive and well in our church. And at the same time, we're not knocking a Sunday morning meeting. We're not knocking. It has been a beautiful thing. God trusted us to expand his kingdom, and I know you know that, but and it still works. And even the unsaved people know there will always be a Sunday morning. He's probably right in our culture, but there's something greater happening right now. There is a generation awakening that is awakening first and foremost to the nature of God being perfect love, which is what we've talked about. That is the foundational place, that encounter with love. But then that second thing that they're awakening to is that maybe this isn't working. And what I love is you guys are running at developing and not afraid to fail and get it right again, but running at developing ways by which we, the church, can meet, live and move and have our being and expand his kingdom. And I'd love you to tell us maybe give the practicals of what it looks like right now for you guys.
I was reading, the classic story of David and Goliath, and it speaks to this whole thing about, church Sundays and the existing leadership collective of that expression, which is a good expression, but it's only one expression. Yeah. And that is, when David came to the hillside, Goliath is taunting the armies of Israel. He's the youngest dude on the hillside that day, pretty much. Yeah. Everybody's sitting there, talking, man, what are we going to do with this guy down here? And he's saying all this stuff, and I don't know, I'm not going down there. The guy chopped my head off. He's 10 times my size. I'm not going. You go. I'm not going. You go. So these are the conversations that are going on around there, and all the while Goliath was still throwing his taunts, and everyone's behind Goliath, and yeah, double for us, kind of thing, kind of a thing, and then David is the only one that asks the question that no one else is asking. He goes, "Who is this that dare defy the armies of Israel, the God of the armies of Israel?" And he just, he just comes out with this question that just pierces across to every other question. And interestingly enough, his question reaches the king's ears. And I sat there and I thought about it. I thought, there's a lot of questions that are asked in churches and models of church and all that stuff. And they're not bad questions. I'd be sitting on the other side going, man, I'm not going to, what are we going to do with this guy? They're not bad. They're status quo questions. that typically people ask. And that's what they were with the people on the hillside. There was nothing changing. They were asking questions. They were status quo questions.
That were
that's
good.
The status quo. David asked the one question that dares not to keep the status quo, and it's the one question that reached the king's ears. And so I made just a covenant with the Lord that day, and I said, Lord, I only want to ask questions that reach the king's ears. I want to reach your ears, Lord. And I said, I don't presume to know what the questions are. Would you tell me what the questions are you want me to ask? That reach your ears. And those questions, they led us into where we are now and what this thing starts to look like. And there is hardly a day goes by where we're not confronted with a brand new set of questions.
And
that's a good thing, because the question, without the answer, it's. I got a picture. The Lord gave me a picture of me sitting on the floor as a 5-year-old boy, and this was a hypothetical. It wasn't something that I remember anyway happening. And I'm sitting on the floor as 5-year-old Mark, and my dad's sitting opposite me, and we're doing a 20-piece jigsaw puzzle. And 5-year-old Mark sees about 4 pieces in his frame of reference, but my dad is wise and he's older, and he sees all 20 pieces. And so without 5-year-old Mark knowing it, he's nudging pieces and shifting them around so that they sort of getting close. And then 5-year-old Mark goes, "Oh, that piece would fit in there." And Dad goes, "Wow, good job, well done. That's amazing." And then, as I sat and watched this from afar, looking down on it, it really dawned on me that the goal of my dad sitting on the floor with 5-year-old Mark had nothing to do with puzzle completion, because he could have completed that puzzle in 10 seconds flat. His whole goal was intimacy. And the whole purpose of questions is not to figure out these complex issues, but it's actually an invitation to deeper intimacy. Yeah. And he asked me, he said, "What size problems do you want?" And I thought, well, that can't be the Lord. And I said, "Well, can I be honest?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, those real little ones that I can answer with an email or a quick phone call?" And he sounded disappointed. He goes, "Oh, I could give you those problems." I said, "You sound disappointed." He goes, "I'm only going to ask you one more time, only ever ask this one more time. What size problems do you want?" And give me the biggest problems I can handle. And he could hear the pleasure in his voice as he goes, "Yes, well done." And these are the questions now that reach a king's ears, because they're not given, "So I solve problems." While they do solve problems, the greater purpose is they're the invitation for Mark to deeper places of intimacy. So I can encounter what it means to be the bride and then be a true carrier of the ecclesia to the four ends of the earth.
That's good.
And so what does that look like? Hey, wherever we can, we establish micro communities, and we can establish them now at cost neutral. It costs us nothing to start a new community. So we've solved the budget problem on that front. And then with the tools and the resources we've put together and the training we've put together, it's very basic and simple, but it empowers people. Each person who wants to start a micro church, they get a free coach alongside them. It's just a pastor in their corner, as little or as much as they need, to support them and to sustain them in the journey and in the run.
The micro communities can look any shape and size, fulfill any purpose. In Australia, we've got a lady who's running. It's like a mother's group or a play group for young mums.
That's awesome.
Mums, young
mums. So cool.
And it's getting together with the kids. But while they're there, she introduces the Anothen teaching, plays a little bit of the Anothen worship, and then gets discussion going. And
that's
talks
awesome.
to them and builds relationships with them.
Yeah.
And these are the sorts of groups that she's setting up. You could run a book club. It could last for 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years.
And you guys are providing worship. I've been on trips with you where you've recorded worship, and so that's presented. There's teaching. So there's all those resources are still there. Some of those things that we actually are looking for.
Yeah, exactly right.
It allows you to be flexible. If you are a person who has a heart to, you really feel like the Lord's putting it on your heart to get a group of people together and actually run one of these things, but you don't have the confidence yet because you're not at that stage in your journey with Him to do the teaching, we have the teaching there. You can access the teaching. We put it up. It's only 12, maybe 15 minutes that you watch the video, you listen to the conversation that we're having. We ask a few questions that actually are intended to get people discussing. We're actually just wanting to inject some sort of spiritual curiosity among people so that they're going to talk about these things. And then, you're only having to facilitate what goes on in the group. You don't actually have to plan out a teaching or a schedule or whatever, unless you want to. We have some leaders of groups who really really love to do that. So they'll use some of the teachings for most of the time, and then occasionally they'll go offline for a little bit and they'll do their own thing because this is what the Lord's laid on their heart. But that's what we want to do. We want to train up people who are going to go out into all the world and spread the gospel. So if they start off using all of our teaching and all of our worship and then end up not, but still plugged in to a broader community, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Teaching them how to hear the voice of God by reading the Word of God, and we're trusting Holy Spirit to spread His church. It's not actually up
beautiful.
to us, and it doesn't depend on us.
But we put tools in their hands to help set them up for success and get the traction and get them moving.
Right.
And and so the access to online training and resources there. They get the access to a free coach, and then access to the actual practical resources to apply in the context of their group. So we're now getting it translated into German and into Nepalese at the moment, all of our training.
Oh, wow.
The goal is to keep adding more and more to that as well as we go along. So,
that's kind of the culture of freedom question that you asked a little bit earlier.
Yes, it is.
Was, what does that look like? That looks like people running in what they believe the Lord's calling them to run in. Does that mean that some of them are going to go off the rails a little bit and go a little bit screwy?
Probably, yeah.
Probably so, but it's not. It's His church. It's not our church.
That's beautiful.
And we're called to equip people and release them.
One of the cool byproducts is now there's probably as many people in groups that we just don't know and have never met as those we do know and have met. So that's sort of a fun transition that we're starting to make now. Right. I really love that. That says we're on the right track.
Man, this has been fun. I'm honored, guys, that you're here, and we do have to ask you about your favorite tacos. We can't let this go by without at least acknowledging that you guys eat tacos.
We do. We had tacos for dinner last night.
We did, and in fact, we're going to have them for lunch tomorrow as well. But
did you eat tacos in Australia? Is that was that big there?
Yeah, we did. But what we realized when we moved over here is that what we thought was traditional Mexican
Australian
had quite the Aussie slant on it.
Oh yeah.
Remember that taco is about the only Mexican phrase that we say correctly.
That's right.
Because we say fajitas and tortillas.
We did. Because if you walk into a restaurant and ask for a tortilla, they look at you like you're trying to be someone else.
Super hybrid.
In Australia, like you're a hoity-toity. I got you.
Yeah, you are very.
But when you come here, you should probably say tortilla.
And we said tortillas, and they looked at us like, "What rock did you crawl out from under?"
That's hilarious.
Do you guys have fajitas? Do you serve fajitas?
Fajitas, really?
That's awesome.
Now here's the real question: hard shells or soft shells?
Careful.
For me, definitely soft, because it is the biggest practical joke in the world to give you a hard shell, because one bite and the thing just explodes in your hand. So I'm definitely soft.
Mark.
Well, I would have said hard shells, but then last night Dale bought those tiny little street.
Oh, Dale, he's awesome.
Soft shells, because usually the soft shells are flour tortillas, and I can't eat flour, so I don't do the weird thing. But the corn tortillas, the soft corn tortillas.
See, there's a debate. There's a disagreement here that soft taco is the only right way to do a taco.
So who's soft and who's hard?
He's soft.
Yeah. It's a soft taco. That's how God intended them. That's how.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. All right.
We rethink a lot of things here, but not tacos. No, I'm just kidding.
Where can we find your stuff? Where can people go to find you?
So pretty much what we do have a website, which is anothen.co, anothen.co. Really, it is just a billboard for the app. Everything happens through the app, and you'll find that at U Church. It was YOU Church. That's our app. You'll get that on every platform. And then through there, the app is designed to have two completely different sections on it, which is micro churches and Anothen Biz Solutions. So everything you need to know. If you need coaching and consulting and things like that, personal, spiritual coaching in your business, all that kind of stuff.
Or your personal life.
Yeah, or your personal life. That's
Either
right.
All together.
Or micro churches. So on any of those fronts, that's where we are, and that's where you find us. And we're still very actively coaching business leaders all over the world. So if there's anybody that's wanting to find out more about that, reach out to us through that platform. It's very easy to have a call to action and follow through, and we'll set up a call for your free consultation. And or you want to know more about micro churches, you'll find all that out there and how to get a hold of us.
Awesome.
This has been so much fun, guys. It was really nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll meet face to face at some point.
Yeah.
I'd like that. That would be good.
Yeah. Love you guys.
Awesome.
Yes.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. We hope it encouraged. We had a lot of fun making it.
If you guys want to subscribe to this podcast, please do. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
All of them.
anywhere you might listen to podcasts.
And leave a review.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Especially if it's a good review. We're just getting started, right?
We don't want bad reviews.
No. Also, if you want to follow us on social media, you can go to, I know this man has a Twitter account. We both do.
160 followers.
Nice.
It's very active.
It's about to skyrocket. And if you want to find us online, we're at afamilystory.org, afamilystory.org. Also, you can reach me there if you want to get a hold of us for any reason at jason@afamilystory.org.
We're excited that you guys are on this journey with us, and we look forward to releasing more content.
Yep. Thanks. See you.